Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar. Happy St. Patrick's Day. It's Thursday, March 17, 2016. I got some feedback from one of you recently that I was talking too fast, and that's about the 1,000th time I've been told that in my life, so I'm taking that and going to try to slow down. Some of the last few webinars I think I have sped up a little bit, so I'm going to try to slow it down. It's a good night to do so because I think, in my opinion, besides of course the Journey of the Heroic Parent, this is my favorite parenting book. I think it is, in the last 25 years, the most important parenting book that we've had out there. I think it does a great job of combining research. I think it presents some really fundamental ideas in how to be connected to your child and then at the same time to feel the responsibility to do one's own work and how it can lead to that contribution. So I think it's a phenomenal piece of work. I've got some feedback from parents in the past that sometimes it's a little bit technical, and so what I tried to pull out of, especially in part one, some of the seminal ideas so that you have a framework, and when you go in and read this book, it can be more meaningful. So this is from the book Parenting from the Inside Out, and this is going to be part one of a two-part series on it by Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell. And again, Daniel Siegel is an incredible brain scientist, and he has several other great books. Many people say his Whole Brain Child book is their favorite. Brainstorm is also another one that a lot of people rave about. And combined with Mary Hartzell's work as a therapist and an educator, helping people understand how to make application from some of his scientific principles, I think we have a really good match and a really great piece of work for parents to look at. Research in the field of child development, Siegel says, has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is very strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life experiences. A simple way for me to understand this is the more clear you can be about who you are, the more you know your truth. A lot of times I'll draw a circle on the ground around somebody, representing this is their circle, this is who they are. And if they can define who they are, and that's a work in progress and an ideal to strive for. But if I know who I am and I can see myself, then I'm very clear about everything that is not me. But if I don't know who I am, if my circle meanders and wanders and has gaps in it, so I don't know where the line is, then when I'm looking at you, when I'm looking at the child, I don't know what I'm seeing. Am I seeing part of me? Am I seeing my own childhood? Am I seeing the rules and roles from my own family of origin? So the most important and powerful thing that I'll say at the outset of Siegel's work is that it doesn't mean that you had to have an ideal childhood by any stretch. But what we need to do, what is our responsibility, is to make sense out of our childhood. All the parenting questions that I run into have their origin in this idea of a lack of knowledge of who we are. That's why in my book I talk about the real question is not what do I do, but the real question is who am I? And when that question is answered, it is much easier to figure out what do I do in this situation. So defining our own truth, knowing who we are, knowing where our wounds are, knowing what our particular conglomeration of imperfectness is and is like, and what are the themes. Those are all things that are going to help me be a more clear parent, person, friend, partner in life. This reminds me a lot. I didn't put it in here because I wanted this whole slide presentation to be dedicated to parenting from the inside out. But it really does sound a lot like the opening page of Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, which I think is the most important child development book. This is the most important parenting book, but the most child development book that we know about. And where she says that the one enduring weapon we have against mental illness is in the discovery of our own unique childhood. It's very similar to what Siegel is describing. Siegel has made it much more scientific, much more brain-based than Alice Miller. Alice Miller drew upon her experience and education as an analyst, and Siegel draws upon his experience as a brain scientist to come to the very same conclusion. Like I said, are we doomed if we had trauma or a flawed model of poor parenting growing up? I mean, is that going to doom us or sentence us to being ineffective parents? And of course, probably wouldn't answer the question if it was yes. But it doesn't. The people that I know who have a higher capacity in their parenting skills don't measure up in terms of their own childhood and their wounds. In fact, many of them have some pretty significantly troubled childhoods and some significantly poor models of parenting. But what they did do is they did their work. They made sense out of it. They dove into it. And by diving into it, they got clear of it. And they don't fix it. You don't arrive, right? But you engage in a process that gives a greater assurance that when you're parenting, when you're relating to somebody, that you're not going to be reacting out of an unconscious place, right? Out of a trauma place. And that's what happens for us when we get reactive. We're reacting out of another context. Something else is going on. And that's why so many of our discussions in relationships go nowhere, because we're not talking about what we're talking about. If we were, we're bright people, most of us. We could arrive at a reasonable conclusion, but we replay the same stories over and over again because those stories have their genesis in the wounds, the trials, the rules of our childhood. As he says, research has clearly demonstrated that our children's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened to us when we were young if we do not come to process and understand those experiences. So our childhoods will dictate it if we don't understand them. That's the hope that comes from Siegel and Hartzell's work. I used to talk about, in fact, when I thought years ago what's going to be the title for my book, what I thought it was going to be was The Coincidence of Raising a Good Kid. Because I wanted to really emphasize that idea of not direct, simple cause and effect. Excuse me, but rather exploring the dance, the dynamic, the cycles that happen in relationship. Let's talk about that idea in that relationship without oversimplifying it. Let's talk about the impact, the influence, the invitation that good parenting is. The way that Salvador Minuchin, a great family therapist, described it is you become this immovable object. Not rigid, but in a way you become more authentic, more clear. And then the planets that orbit around you, so to speak, the people that are in your lives, have to orient themselves to you or they fall out of your orbit. That's what happens in this process. And so this is one of my favorite, I've used this quote on many, many webinars because it illustrates so well the responsibility and obligation we have as parents to do our own work and the liberation that we can arrive at when we realize that it's not about pushing a button in our child. It's not about a simple cause and effect relationship. Even if we have come to understand ourselves well, our children will still make their own journey through life. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper self-understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not guarantee its outcome. Right? So we talk about contribution. We talk about the container that we provide. We talk about the environment that we are a part of. We talk about the impacts that we have. But we don't talk about guarantee. We don't talk about, like they suggest in Al-Anon, we don't talk about control or cause or cure. We talk about it in terms of the softer sciences, the contact. Because, again, if our parents, this is the fascinating thing about parents, right, that I work with, is they're up to their ears in frustration with the blame that their child put on them. Right? Sometimes they internalize that. They become guilty. They blame themselves. They would never blame their parents. Right? The parents that feel an overwhelming sense of guilt for how they have screwed up their child almost always will say to me, I don't blame my parents. Absolutely not. It doesn't work that way. You don't get to be the cause of all the problems in the world. Right? You don't get to be the cause of all of your child's problems and all the problems in your family of origin because your parents were perfect. We can start to compassionately and courageously look at the generational transmission of issues. I love I was thinking about this week because I saw the DVD while I was on vacation with my children a couple of times of Inside Out, that cartoon that won the Oscar for Best Animated Picture, about where those characters are in people's head. And I saw how powerful it was that when the children started to get upset at the table, the parents got mad at their feelings. They got mad at their feelings. Suggesting to the little girl at the dinner table, and that's when she blew up at them, suggesting that something was wrong with her feelings and that it was about disrespect. Right? And I think the rules that we get taught in our family so often are don't feel angry, don't feel sad, put on a happy face. In that cartoon, she was reinforced over and over and again for being our happy little girl. That was her identity. That's what she needed to be for her parents to feel okay and safe. That's the story, and Inside Out. And so many times there are these rules that get passed down from generation to generation that are unconscious. The psychoanalyst Bion said that the unconscious is the not known. Right? It's that thing that we know, but we don't have conscious access to it. It's the thing that drives all of us, and we have no idea what it is. And so our work is to get to the unconscious, to understand, to pick it apart. I was working with a parent and a child on a parent phone call today with a therapist, and we were talking about this idea about how she needs to learn to metaphorically kill her parents in her mind, because she is absolutely in a cage with her parents, because she thinks she needs to be something to take care of them, to make them happy, to make them proud. And of course she doesn't. And continuing with the same idea, research has shown the exciting finding that parents who they themselves did not have good enough parents, that's a term from Melanie Klein, or even who had traumatic childhoods, can make sense of their lives and have healthy relationships. Very similar statement. And I'm not going to cite the research. Next webinar, part 2, has a lot more of the research studies that I'll share with you. But here I'm just kind of bringing the grand ideas out. But this is based on research, and solid, fantastic research, actually. So all the things that I talked to you about are about doing your own work. And I suppose, I bet the parents that don't think they have any work to do, the ones that think this is my child's problem, why do I need to do work? I don't think they probably show up on the webinar. But maybe you slip into that thought process sometimes. Maybe you do. And so this book gives you a very practical reason, motivation to look inside of yourself, not just the theoretical or kind of the flowery way that it can be presented to you sometimes, even by me. Attachment is huge. Attachment, there's nothing more important. Attachment to children mitigates trauma. Attachment to children improves resiliency. Attachment to children improves empathy in them. Attachment to children improves self-esteem and connection, right? That's just to name a few. And the research bears it out, and it's not arguable. Attachment is huge. Listening, connection, empathy is so powerful and builds self-esteem in our children. Research suggests that children who have had a positive connection in life have a source of resilience for dealing with life's challenges. Children learn about themselves by the way we communicate with them. It's so true. I've said this before. This is my dissertation, looking at childhood trauma, looking at what could possibly mitigate that childhood trauma so that healthy relationships could be developed later. And the answer was somebody who saw them. I had a parent say to me at the parent meeting last night in Houston, Texas, fairly early on in the process, saying, I want you to find our daughter and help us find her again. And that's really what we're doing. And so much of your agenda, so much of your frustration, your fear, your anxiety prevents you from being able to see them. I said to the parents last night, I've said this on the webinar before, I don't get anxious when your children are struggling. You do, but I don't. I get anxious when my children are struggling. I don't get anxious when your children are struggling. When your children are struggling, I sometimes think, gosh, I think they're kind of cool. They're feisty. They're clever. Gosh, they have a lot of wisdom beneath that pain. There's a really good reason why they're cutting on themselves or not going to school or self-medicating. Right? I have that clarity because I have enough distance from them that I can see them. You're in them. I'm in my own children. My circle is not clearly defined when it comes to my children. Right? That's my work in this process. And how we talk about them, how we communicate with them, that tells them more. Telling your children they're great isn't the answer. In fact, in the book Nurture Shock, it actually kind of hurts them sometimes when you talk about how great they are all the time, how gifted and smart they are. How we are with them is how they learn about who they are. And so, as a lot of you know, that awareness, that sensibility in you changes when you do this work. I don't think about people the same way I thought about people 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Right? You don't think about people, those of you who have been at this a while, you don't think about people the way you used to think about people. You've evolved, you've grown beyond it. The overall outline of the book encourages you to build an approach to parenting that is founded on basic principles of internal understanding and interpersonal connection. The anchor points for this approach to the parent-child relationship are mindfulness, lifelong learning, response flexibility, mindsight, and joyful living. I'm going to touch on a few of those, and they're really important. One of the things that we added to the program, emphasizing the program when we changed from being second nature to evoke, was a more mindfulness approach, more mindfulness activities, more mind-body health connection, understanding, and insight. So that's an important part of it. It's something we do at our intensives. We practice, give some examples of mindfulness. We talk and teach about mindfulness at them. Lifelong learning, of course, is... I was just on a phone with a prospective parent just before I started this webinar. So I was a couple of minutes close to being late. And I was talking about... It's so interesting, isn't it, to talk to somebody who's just considering this intervention. And they have every reason to send their son to us, and they probably will, and they're debating. And I said to them, a year from now, you're going to say, why did we wait? And they're almost ready. And a year from now, you're going to realize it's not a destination. Right? I was talking with an adult client today, and he was talking about some struggles he had with a previous therapist. And as I was listening to him describe it, I realized, and I said to him, I think the reason you had a problem with your previous therapist is because your previous therapist already had all the answers. He said to me 3 or 4 times on the phone call, no one ever asked me that question before in my life, and I've been to lots of therapists. This is not a young adult, this is an adult. And I said, really? And then I offered that to him. I said, that your therapist probably thought they already had the answers. And that's why they didn't ask the question. Response flexibility is the opposite of reactivity. It's the opposite of a trauma response. It's the ability to cycle through a series of choices and make a decision. It rarely is yelling or raising your voice. It rarely has anger and rage in it at all. It doesn't have terror or fear, has little anxiety in it. All of that stuff is kept at bay so that we can cycle through several options and make a decision based on what will be most helpful and most compassionate and most loving and generous and clear and authentic. And I know I just said a mouthful, but response flexibility is a huge deal. It's what we strive for. It's what we want. It's what results from sorting through our stories of our trauma, small t or big T, going through those over and over again, learning how we were hurt, learning what it was like to be our parents' child, our teachers' students. I was talking to somebody about university today. I sound like I'm from Canada all of a sudden. I was talking to somebody about going to school at university today, and we were describing the fact that getting my PhD was like being tortured. And I asked her, because she's on a faculty of a university psychology department, she said she'd been in 3 faculties, and each of them had their certain neuroses. She said when she was in the English department, it was all about, I am more cultured than thou, right? That was the theme, culture. And everybody was trying to prove they were more cultured and be more cultured, and they were more cultured. And then she was in the philosophy department, and that was simple. The theme in that crazy department was, I am smarter than you. Everybody was trying to be the smartest. That's what everybody needed to be. And then she said, in the psychology department, the neuroses is, I am more normal than you. Isn't that funny? And I said, that's the worst. The other 2 would be unpleasant also, but that one I would be the most angry about. to be in that department. But the reason I tell that story is because each context has its own neuroses. Each family has its own neuroses. Every child's responsibility is to unpack and unravel what those were, what the limitations, what the blind spots were. That's why when we travel and go to another culture, go to another country, we realize everybody's not like us in a big way. People see the world completely different, completely paradigmatically different than we do. And we learn that. And then we start to get enough exposure where we say, what I believe might not be the truth. It just might be my truth. It just might be my version of the way things are. And that's a powerful, powerful thing. And then we can start making choices. Then it's not just a given. Then we become the fish who discovers water for the first time. And as they say, the fish is the last one to discover water. Mindsight is a way of being able to see ourselves, look at ourselves. It is a way of describing awareness and emotional quotient, an EQ, if you will. And of course, out of all of this comes more joy. Mindful and parenting. Mindfulness is at the heart of nurturing relationships. When we are mindful, we live in the present moment and are aware of our own thoughts and feelings and also are open to those of our children. The ability to stay present with clarity within ourselves allows us to be fully present with others and to respect each person's individual experience. No two people see things in the exact same way. Mindfulness is being present. Therapy is a kind of mindfulness. Meditation can be a kind of mindfulness. We do mindful eating in the field where you eat slowly. You taste it. You don't do two things at once. You don't do one thing while you're thinking of another. If you're talking to somebody, you're fully talking to them. If you're doing some chores, you're fully doing the chores. If you're eating, you're fully eating. If you're listening, you're engrossed in the listening. If you're reflecting, you're paying attention to what you feel. You pay attention to the way your body feels and where's that coming from. Have I been holding some stress? I just noticed that I was holding my shoulders up. Have I been clenching my jaw? Have I been frowning and furrowing? Have I been holding my fists together? And you start to be present with yourself. And mindfulness is enormous in reducing anxiety and affecting depression. It is enormous when it comes to developing a healthy attachment to your children. I had somebody, every once in a while people will say to me, when I tell them I'm a therapist, they're like, well, I don't want to be analyzed by you. And I always say, I don't want to do more work. I work enough. I don't want to do more work. And then there's another part of me that says, I'm kind of always analyzing people. And all of us are. I just have more tools to do it than the untrained person. But what I learn, what I realize is I'm paying attention to if somebody is present with me. I'm paying attention to, I see where they might be hurt or scared, and people are living in so much fear, so much anxiety, right? Unless, of course, I'm in my own anxiety, and then I'm just trying to prove that I'm worthy of being in the room with them, right? That I'm worthwhile, that I'm lovable, that I mean something. And I'm getting better at even noticing those moments when that's what I'm doing. And instead of judging it and beating myself up and being regretful and just stopping, I can observe it and say, what's going on? Why in this context am I trying to prove myself? Why did I just tell that story? What am I feeling in here? So mindfulness allows us to be in relationship to the other in a very, very connected way. And if we're mindful, there's no judgment, meaning it's not a hierarchy. It's not a better than. The way that Ram Dass talks about it is he talks about you walk into the forest and you see all kinds of trees, bent trees, broken over trees, crooked trees, straight trees, tall trees, short trees. And you just see them as a forest. And then somehow you walk out of the forest and into a town, into a city, and you lose all of that. You have judgments about the way people are. They stop becoming different and they stop becoming better and worse, prettier and uglier, fatter and skinnier, smarter and dumber. We just don't see them as trees. And so he said, part of our idea is learn to see people as trees. And so mindfulness has with it an ability to just observe and see. When we feel angry, we don't judge the anger. We feel it. We go into it. We look at it. We find out where it comes from. And we let it pass through us. So mindfulness it sounds very hippy-dippy-ish. But the great thing now that we can see more specifically into the brain, is that when we can see when people practice mindfulness, that their anxiety, distractibility goes down, their executive functioning improves, and their brain chemistry is healthier. So it's not for hippies anymore, just for hippies anymore. Lifelong learning. Your children give you the opportunity to grow and challenge you to examine issues left over from your own childhood. If you approach such challenges as a burden, parenting can often become an unpleasant chore. If, on the other hand, you try to see these moments as learning opportunities, then you can continue to grow and develop. It's radical acceptance, right? It's faith. It's paying attention to what is instead of what should be. It's embracing the journey. It's the heroic journey. It's all the same stuff. It prevents suffering, and it increases joy. It makes you a better resource for your child. It creates you have a better regard for your child, maybe most importantly, for them. When you adopt this idea of lifelong learning as he's describing it, I would call it radical acceptance, he's calling it lifelong learning. When you adopt this idea, your child doesn't see themselves as a problem. You know, your child doesn't see somebody who's causing the one who loves them the most pain and frustration. When our children experience themselves as this thing that is the problem, right? The concern, the worry, then they're broken. And you can't be around people who make you feel broken. You don't want to. Being around people who make you feel broken, you're going to end up acting broken. You're going to end up needing to self-medicate, or you're going to have to get out of there. So part of this idea of lifelong learning is an antidote to that, is the reverse of that, is us embracing and looking at them as our teachers instead of our burden, instead of the cause of all of our pain. Response flexibility. This is the difference between intentionality and primitive, unfiltered responses. Being able to respond in flexible ways is one of the biggest challenges of being a parent. Response flexibility is the ability of the mind to sort through a wide variety of mental processes, such as impulses, ideas, and feelings, and come up with a thoughtful, non-automatic response. Response flexibility is the opposite of a knee-jerk reaction. It involves the capacity to delay gratification and to inhibit impulse behaviors. This ability is the cornerstone of emotional maturity in compassionate relationships. It's what happens when an adult shows up, a real adult, not a chronological adult, but a real adult. And we don't always show up as adults, right? One of the things I talk about in my practice a lot lately is this idea of I know what it looks like. I know what the ideal looks like. And I know what I did or what I'm inclined to do. And the space in between those 2 points, this space, that's my work. Why can't I respond the way that Thich Nhat Hanh or Gandhi or Jesus or God, why can't I respond the way that they would? And whatever that answer is where I have work to strive for. And it's unattainable. Not in a perfect way. And so that gives me something to work on for the rest of my life. And thank heavens for that. I have a friend at the university also. And there was a friend from back east, some big college that was considering coming out here to teach at University of Utah. And called another professor friend and said, you know, what's it like out there? And he said, well, it's different than where you're from. He said, well, like, how big is Salt Lake City? How big is it? And he said, there's about 8 people here. He's like, 8 people? What do you mean? You mean 8 million people? He said, no, just 8. The rest of them are wind-up toys. And what he was saying is, we're so homogeneous, right? There's very few of us who are living. It wasn't necessarily just a critique of Salt Lake City. It's a critique of everywhere. Right? How many of us are really living? How many of us think we have work to do? How many of us are aware that there's a sea of unconscious stuff in us still yet to be explored? How many of us realize that 5 years from now, we're going to think that the things we're saying right now are primitive and elementary? and uneducated. That there's going to be a new version of ourselves. How many of us are aware of that? How many of us know that we don't have the answers for other people? That we don't know other people's truths? That what we think is true about ourselves and the world right now, we will think some of those things aren't true about ourselves and the world a few years from now, and then 10 years from now, and then 15 years. When is there going to be a generation that doesn't think that their generation is better than the upcoming generation? When is that going to happen? When is there going to be a generation that looks at their younger generation and says, yeah, they got their problems, but they're way better than us. And yeah, their problems are unique, and every generation is so good at creating unique problems. And unique music that offends the previous generation. Right? So I don't know how I got off on that, but it's getting into the unconscious, looking at what is non-evaluated, non-understood in us, and doing the work. That's why I'm going to make a big push tonight for the April intensive. That's for parents who want to do this work, who want to start to do this work, who want to dive into this work. Come to the intensive. Go to do all the stuff that we talk about. The intensive is a specific immersion into it. Response flexibility, being and doing in a sense of self-work. When we are too busy doing things for our children, we forget how important it is to simply be with them. I wish I had known this earlier before my child came to Voc. I hear that all the time. When we become parents, we often see ourselves as our children's teachers, but we will soon discover that our children are our teachers. And why I have that is because this is the way you learn. It's so funny. Sometimes I'll hand my book or this book or another something to a parent. It's not a particular crisis or very early on in the process. And they'll say, I've had people say to me recently, your book was okay. I didn't really get it. Yeah, sort of. But people who have been through this, or months later will read the same thing and they're like, it's amazing. It's amazing how much this book changed in 6 months, or this idea. I was telling somebody today that I think I have one of the greatest therapists ever to walk on the planet. And I didn't think that about her 20 years ago, 18 years ago. Thought she was good enough. And then 10 years ago, I thought she was pretty darn good. And 5 years ago, I thought she was really good. And now I think she's amazing. Look how much she's learned in all these years. So part of it is that as we change in the process, as we change through our children, they teach us, we learn something from them in this process. And we become grateful that our dreams didn't work out the way that we wanted. Why is it not a simple conscious process? When the child becomes a parent without the opportunity to process these events and make sense of these frightening early experiences, emotional, behavioral, perceptual, and bodily memories may continue to intrude on her life. These unresolved issues can profoundly impair the parent-child relationship. So that's what happens to us, and that's why we don't do a lot of things well, because they intrude upon our life and they take over. Memories are stored in assemblies in the brain that aren't always the most conscious one. They're stored in movement, emotional, cognitive, verbal, smell, sight, touch, feel. They're stored everywhere in the brain. They're stored in our body and our nerves in many ways, right? Disease can come out of stress. We know that. We know that anxiety and worry can lead to an ulcer. Everybody in the world knows that, right? And there's probably much more far-reaching. So we were learning that our pain is stored throughout the body, and so part of what we do is we engage in experiential therapy. We get outside and move. We make that mind-body-spirit connection to be able to uncover it all. And the research now it's not just hippies saying this. Now the research is showing it. The value of experience and experiential therapies is both in the uncovering and the healing of the trauma. Implicit memories. The confusion we experience as we operate in the now with the context of the then. This book explains the development of the brain, memory, and mind and the relationship to our functioning. The fascinating feature of implicit memory is that when it is being retrieved, it lacks an internal sensation that something is being recalled, and the individual is not even aware that this internal experience is being generated from something from the past. So We don't experience it as a memory. We're having a reaction to something. It's just another way of saying an unconscious process, issue, construct in our head. Right? We get mad at somebody in some situation, we overreact, which really means that we're reacting appropriately to a past trauma, inappropriately for the current situation. And like they say in Al-Anon, if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? So when somebody's overreacting to you, instead of saying you're overreacting, saying there must be a reason. I was talking about this in a couple of examples this week. Don't tell the other person they're overreacting or they're acting irrationally. Ask them, you must have a good reason for this. Tell me what it is. That's the difference. That's somebody who's aware of this concept of implicit memories that are coming up for somebody without a sense of them being. If you can make the implicit memory explicit, then you have choice over it. Then you know, oh my gosh, I'm in a situation where this is happening, triggers this other thing in me that I feel about anger or fear or whatever, and I don't have to respond the same way. That's response flexibility. That's moving it from implicit to explicit. Telling our stories. We talk in our wellness model about the value, healing, and integration that comes from telling our story. I often say when teaching this model that we use words to tell our story, but children encode memory in nonverbal parts of the brain and use the experiential activity. And the use of these experiential activities can help to retrieve feelings and memories and lead to subsequent healing. As Siegel and Hartzell say, telling the story gave Annika comfort and allowed her not only the sense to make sense of what happened, but to anticipate the future outcome. As adults, we usually tell our stories with words. Children, however, even those who can understand spoken language greatly benefit from using props, like dolls, puppets, drawing pictures to help them make sense of their experiences. So children aren't little adults. That's an important aspect, right? They're different qualitatively than we are. And so it's important for us to understand that they think differently and they express differently. And it becomes the adult's job to hear them, right? To see them. That's a task. And that's a tall order because they're good at not communicating effectively, right? So that's where it becomes our responsibility to develop a greater capacity to see them. And when we see them, we get less angry, we get less frustrated, we get less reactive. Knowing your story. Know thyself. Your story and your implicit memories shape how you perceive the world, interpret events, and respond interpersonally. Know what you feel. What is your truth? Your feelings are the doorway into your thoughts, right? And your thoughts are a conglomeration of the beliefs, the things that you were taught, the stories that you've bought, and you will recreate circumstances to support the story that you've bought. And the story you've bought is not the true story. It just is one story. Okay? You can refer to Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, where he talks about that idea a lot. The story that you've bought is not necessarily the truth. It is just one story. As a parent, making sense of your life is important because it supports your ability to provide emotionally connecting and flexible relationships with your children. Having a coherent sense of your own life history enables you to offer the kind of experiences that help children make sense of their own lives. There may be other times when we may become aware of being filled up with some different sensations. And I'll talk about this when I talk about it in part 2. But they really do some great research around a parent's capacity to tell their own story, the quality of which they tell it, and then they're able to predict the quality of attachment with the child sometime later. So that's a powerful piece of research that we'll talk about in our next webinar. Attunement. Attunement is connection. It's being able to see. It's what listening is encourages us to lead to. It's what mindfulness can also lead to. Attuning to your child's emotions can mean getting down on his level, having an open and receptive demeanor, looking at what he has brought to show you, and expressing curiosity and enthusiasm in your tone of voice. When a parent resonates with the child's emotions, the child experiences of himself as that he is good. I've told this story before, but I was in a New York City parent meeting last year and a half ago, something like that, and a mother was telling a heart-wrenching story about her depressed daughter, and how her daughter, and she used this metaphor of her daughter laying underneath a bus, and she did everything in the world to get her daughter out from under the bus. And the metaphor that we offered to her was, we want to teach you how to get under the bus with her, right? You don't have to absorb it all, but go to where she's at. When you try to pull her out of where she's at, she feels unheard, misunderstood, broken. Something's wrong with her. So we learn to hear them. We learn to see them in their pain, their brokenness. And that asks something of us. It asks us to look at something that is terrifying to us, which is our own unconscious mind. Right? I was doing some supervision with a therapist recently, and there was a process where the therapist, I thought, in the kindest way possible, was condescending to the parent. Talking about the parent in such a way that, saying things like, I'm worried about you. We're all worried about you. And while it had the superficial appearance of love, it had a condescension to it. And what I realized was the relationship was like this, and the therapist was looking down on the littleness of the parent and not being kind to it because she was afraid of her own littleness. If she could see her own littleness, she would be able to connect. If she had done more of that work, or it depends upon that day, I don't know how it was that day, but if she had been able to see her own littleness, she would have all the compassion and connection, and she could sit with the parent's littleness. Because the parent was dealing with a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of difficulty. I skipped that slide on purpose. I'm going to include that in next week's. Why is emotional relating so challenging? Emotional relating requires a mindful awareness of our own internal states, as well as being open to understanding and respecting our child's state of mind. By the way, I just want to mention, because there's so many great quotes on here from the book, you know you can always ask for the slides, or if you're a current parent, you go to the portal, you can download the slides from the portal. Being able to emotionally relate to our child, this is so fantastic, because it's one of those hard things to do for anybody and for a parent, especially a parent of a child who's struggling with mental health or addiction, because their feelings scare us, because their feelings are wrapped up in and with very harmful, dangerous things. And so relating to them is terrifying, because we're afraid if we relate to them, we're going to encourage them, we're going to fan the flame. Actually, the opposite occurs. And when we try to strangle their feelings, right, try to get them to go away, we then inflame them even more. So relating is hard. And that's why knowing more of your own stuff, knowing more of your own darkness, whatever that stuff is beneath the surface, will create a capacity in you to see them with less anxiety, less stress, more clarity, be able to sit with their emotions. We need to see a situation from our child's point of view as well as our own. When we are unaware of our own emotions or paralyzed by leftover issues and the emotional reactions that come from them, this can be very hard to do. We often don't check in with ourselves and are unaware of our own primary emotional state. So learning how to feel, doing your own therapy, going to your 12-step meetings, going to a parent workshop, parent support group, a parent intensive, all of those things develop greater capacity in these areas. And I'll make the connection without making it simple, cause and effect. And I'm beating the same drum over and over again, I know. But doing this doesn't fix your child, but it does a heck of a lot to support them in this process. Right? Like I say, one of my quotes is, loving a child struggling with mental health or addiction doesn't fix them, it fixes you. And that fix can have a wonderful impact on the child. In contingent communication, the receiver of the message listens with an open mind and with all his or her senses. Her reaction is dependent upon what was actually communicated, not on a predetermined and rigid mental model of what was expected. That's so much of what happens when our children accuse us of being bad listeners, is that exact thing. It happens in therapy, happens in marriages, partnerships, and it happens in parent-child relationships, right? So often parents don't listen to the message their child expresses because they are preoccupied with their own thoughts and feelings, because you're uncomfortable with. You have unresolved stuff. But if you've been through a great deal of struggle and darkness and therapy with it and worked it out, and when you see a child struggling, it doesn't frighten you. It doesn't frighten you. It frightens you less, for sure. Denying reality. Every day we miss opportunities for making true connection because instead of listening and responding appropriately to our children, we respond only from our own point of view and fail to make a connection to their experience. When our children tell us what they think or how they feel, it's important to respect their experience whether or not it is the same as our own. Parents can listen to and understand their children's experience rather than tell them what they think and feel isn't valid. Maybe that's, some of the stuff seems so obvious to me that it almost seems silly to read, but it's not, and we bump up against this all the time, right? It is hard to listen, hard to see them from their perspective. We want to talk them out of it. We want to talk about how they're being unreasonable. We start to become safe for our children and for others when we stop being impatient at how stupid they are, how misguided they are. Our impatience, need to fix, need to teach, their stupidness, their misguidedness is often the very thing that they feel that suggests to them that you're not a safe person to talk to, that I'm not a safe person to talk to. So sometimes just keep your mouth closed, listen, understand, be there, support them. Don't stick your head in the sand, but be patient and curious. And watch for and value the struggles when they bump into the wall that you knew that they were going to bump into. That's not the same as a home therapist saying lay off. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're at peace with the process and you're doing it from an intentional, authentic place, an aware place, a place where you're ready to respond with a helpful response when needed. And you're going to have a compassionate response instead of a judgmental, I told you so. Liberation and freedom. Listening is easier than fixing. It's so great when I'm doing therapy. When I'm struggling and sweating, I am trying to fix it. When it's easy, I'm just listening. Fixing is not listening. Fixing models inappropriate psychological boundaries, owning another feeling. When parents understand that they can let their children have and express, notice this is the only one I put in bold, the entire quote. When parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent to make a connection to the child's experiences without having to deny their feelings. Is there anything more beautiful than that quote from Siegel and Hartzell? To help us understand how trying to fix our children, the enabling, the rescuing we do, is disconnection. And then when we don't take responsibility for fixing it, we're able to see them, and we don't have to deny their feelings. They're being to this or to that, right? We may have learned in our childhood that emotions are bad, and therefore our children's, as well as our own emotions, may be uncomfortable for us. These are those old scripts. Our children benefit. By the way, if some of you on this webinar, I imagine there might be some saying, that didn't happen to me. Come to the intensive. We'll explore it. There are messages like this in all of our lives. I don't know that I've ever met somebody who had a flawless experience in this arena. Our children benefited when we express our feelings directly, simply and in non-threatening ways. A child wants to know not only what his parents think, but also how they feel. When we're upset, angry, or disappointed, excited, proud, or delighted, we can let our children know. Children need to know that we have feelings too. And the important thing is we own them. What we normally do is we describe them. We talk about what they're doing wrong or right. We don't talk about how we're feeling. We don't own it. We make it about them, and we use phrases like, you're making me feel. You make me proud. You make me upset. That's why the I feel statement and the structure of it is so important in this. Children learn to be empathic through seeing the ways in which we emotionally respond, not just the words we say. We can be authentic and passionate as we respect both our children and our own experiences. Happy face studies clearly show that infants need more than just the upbeat response of their parents. They need connections to be contingent. Some of the studies that they showed that if the faces were incongruent, that it was more distressing to the child. if they were incongruent to sounds and other stimulus, that the child was upset. But the child would be more calm, less agitated, if even sad faces were congruent with sad images and sad sounds. If parents only understand their own experience and didn't connect to their child's experiences, they will very likely have difficulty in developing a close, meaningful relationship with their child. On the other hand, if parents only consider their child's point of view and neglect their own internal experience, they will very likely have a difficulty in setting boundaries with their child. That's a beautiful way to understand how the opposite ends of the pendulum are important. And we can see ourselves most likely in one or the other more so. Right? It's a great quote. If parents only consider their child's point of view and neglect their own internal experience, they will very likely have difficulty in setting boundaries with their child. Parents may begin to resent their child for being too demanding. If parents forget to consider their own internal state and take into consideration only the needs and desires of their child, it can leave the parent feeling angry and exhausted and the child feeling insecure from a lack of boundaries. This reminds me of the the blog I wrote on my own website, drbradreedy.com, about a parent's limitations. If you want to read more about that, read about that, where you're allowed to have an end to your capacity, and it does not scar the child. It teaches them empathy and that they have to adjust to the world. But that's not why you do it. You do it because that's the end of your capacity. You do it because that's all you can do. You do it because you're valuable and important also in the equation. Some people worry that the findings of attachment research indicate that our early years created our destiny. In fact, the research shows that relationships with parents can change, and as they do, the child's attachment changes. This means that it is never too late to create a positive change in a child's life. Absolutely. There are things that my mother has done in the past 5 years that have made a huge difference to me. Things that she has said, things that she's recalled from her parenting my child, amends that she has made. Just this last week I was on vacation in her neck of the woods and spent some time with her, and she repeated to me a story that she had told where during a certain critical time in my life when I needed her, she wanted to tell me what to do. This is late into adulthood for me. And when I told her I wasn't willing to have those discussions with her anymore, she went back to therapy at 70 years old and came back a month, 6 weeks later, whatever it was, and said she was sorry and that she had worked in therapy and knew that she could be there for me in the way that I was asking, and then asked, how can I be helpful? It made a huge difference to me. Having a history of trauma or loss does not by itself predispose you to having a child with disorganization. It is the lack of resolution that is the essential risk factor. Saying the same thing over and over again. These are all quotes from the book. Many repeated contingent connections a child experiences with her father, that what she feels internally can be known, respected, and responded to by her father. She feels felt. I love that. She feels felt. That someone important in her life knows her. Alright, that's the end of part 1. Next week I'll get into part 2 where we go over a lot of the research studies and dig into some of these principles, but show you how the research demonstrates a lot of things that I talked about tonight. You can ask for these slides. You can go to the parent portal to get them. Great quotes. Great book. If you haven't had a chance to buy it, I'd encourage you to buy it after these webinars. You can read it before we read the next one. Like I said, I think besides, of course, or along with The Journey of the Heroic Parent, I think, in my opinion, it is the most valuable parenting book that I've seen. Any questions? Is it ever too late to reframe our parent-child relationship? Are they ever too old to make these shifts? I assume you sent that early because that last slide answered it. My mother said to me, I think I may have said this on a webinar before, my mother said last year, she said to me, she said, you were too much for me. I didn't know what to do with you. And I was an acting out kid. And I was angry. And I knew stuff that she didn't. I don't mean that I was smarter than her. I had capacities that she didn't have. And I was angry at our lives. And I didn't know it. And I couldn't say it like that then. I can now. And I could say more. But she said the most beautiful thing when she said, you were too much. I was overwhelmed and I'm sorry. I didn't realize how gifted you were, how wonderful you were, how amazing you were, and I was scared. And that's not the only 2 stories of my mother, but absolutely. And I'm older than all of your children. And so it made a difference just a few years ago. It's never too late. Not until you don't wake up anymore, then it's too late. Did this webinar discuss the same ideas as your previous one on parenting from the inside out? It is on my list of webinars to watch, and with limited time for catch-up on webinars, I want to know if I should watch it as well, or is it redundant? This is the redo of the original. Don't watch the original. I don't even think you have access to the originals anymore anyway. We deleted all of the webinars that are done on the Second Nature template, so all you have is the Evoke ones, and I've never done this one on the Evoke one, so there are no Second Nature webinars anymore. So it is a repeat of the first one that I did, and next week will be a repeat of the second one I did. I did a part 1 and part 2 last time, and I'm doing the same thing this time. Our son is 19 and out of the woods for more than a year, but this is making me think that I spent way too much time writing letters to my son. I wonder if my attempts to help him kept him from feeling that I wanted to hear him. Your thoughts? That's a great idea. Ask him. Wonderful thought and idea. And I'm going to answer this and take a moment to answer this for all of you, but for you, but for all of you. That question that you have, it's not about guilt. That's beautiful. It's wonderful for all. If all of you could come away with one thing today and say, I wonder if I did something ineffective. I wonder if I did something that wasn't a part of the solution. You had that thought in your head. You live that idea. You express that to your child. That's the gift. And then just listen to what they say and be curious and take it in. You know, when your children want to hear your reaction, don't give your reaction. Your reaction is, I just want to hear this. I want to honor this. The question is the beauty. That's what I want all of you to ask. Maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe I have a part in this dance. Maybe I had an impact. It's not cause and effect. It's not guilt. It's not exonerating them. It's not letting them blame you. It's exactly all the opposite. It's just, it's what Melanie Klein talks about when she talks about the evolution of the psyche. When she says we're able to take in the parts, the bad parts that are out there and look at them and say, maybe I have some of these. Maybe I'm a part of this. Maybe this is, I can see myself in it. And if you go too far, and you take on all the responsibility and all the blame, and you do that other thing, you don't really see or connect to the child either. So wonderful, beautiful question. Write about it. Talk to your son about it. Ask him about it. Listen to his answer. Be curious. Digest it. And walk away and ask him about the next thing too. Great question. All right. Thanks, folks. Thanks for the attendance. Good attendance tonight. Charlotte Parent Workshops, we would like all current parents to attend one of those if they possibly can. There, the upcoming one, psychoeducation, experiential in the field, wonderful stuff. Finding You is very intensive work. We are looking for a couple more people for our Finding You one. So if you can make it, you'll have some work to do. You want to get into this stuff we were talking about today, please let us know. Heroic Journeys is for families. That's in May. So that's for parents and children. And then there are the contact numbers for both. Parent support groups coming up. I'll be in Chicago next month. New York City's coming up. I'll get some more on the schedule as soon as I possibly can. Pursuits is our therapy light, sober fun for families and for young adults. We want all families to attend 6 of these meetings while their children are with us. Follow us on social media, inspiring stories, pictures, blogs, so forth, announcements. Here's the book on paperback. If you haven't done a review of it, love to hear your feedback. Go to Amazon, do a review on it. Very appreciative of that. Very, very helpful. Don't do more than one and don't do 2 from the same household. They take them both off, I found out. But if you want to give me feedback about the book and want to talk about what you thought about it, please go there to do that. All right, folks. Part 2 will be a week from tonight, Thursday, March 24th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Parenting from the Inside Out. I hope this is a valuable point of contact for you. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next Thursday night. Take care. Bye-bye.